Hi everybody, it's Alex Newton from K-lytics, today with our Kindle market trends for December 2019. So let's have a look. In our Trend Watch, we look at the performance of the Kindle bestseller list. In fact, we look at more than 7,000 of them. And every month we pick a couple of these for you. In fact, those that show a particular upward or downward motion. As always, you don't have to take notes. If you are a member, you can simply watch this video in the members area and grab your copy of the K-lytics BASIC report in the basic section. If you are not a member yet, you can download one free copy here at klytics.com/free-report. That's klytics.com/free-report. Let's start with the main developments in fiction. If we look at the top Kindle bestseller list in December 2019, we see an unchanged picture at the very top. We have the big umbrella category literature and fiction at the very top, the highest selling one, followed then by the big categories romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, science fiction and fantasy, then non-fiction, then teen, young, adult. And the relative position of these major six categories has been pretty stable. Let's look at each one of them in more detail here, at least at the, the big genre ones, romance, MTS, sci-fi and fantasy, and teen, young, adult. And we also have a little bit of non-fiction data towards the end of the video. Now, in mystery, thriller, suspense, if we look at the sales performance, we have good news. First of all, very stable, high-level performance, but if we put a trend line here, the green line, through the ups and downs of the monthly fluctuations, we see overall here an improvement of the mystery, thriller, suspense sales as we move towards the end of the year 2019. There are many categories within mystery, thriller, suspense. Let's look at this one here, which I found very interesting to pick this month. Mystery, thriller, suspense, medical thrillers. We see the average sales rank of the top 20 titles has improved 40% by 40% over the last 12 months. These types of thrillers have been very popular of recently, so it's probably worth to have a closer look if you are in the mystery, thriller, suspense genre. You will find here big names, smaller names, indies, traditional publishers, Amazon imprint, Thomas & Mercer, very strong. And the medical topic seems to be very popular. Here, Thomas & Mercer, just an arbitrary example, harnessing DNA from ancestry websites to catch a killer in this timely and explosive new medical thriller. Another Thomas & Mercer one, across London, hospital patients are dying. Danielle Girard's medical examiner of the San Francisco Police Department series. Michael Crichton's thriller here, which is in the tightly knit world of Boston medicine. Or big names such as Dean Koontz here, a series of suspicious deaths in retirement homes. And what makes this interesting is also if you plot this on our K-lytics strategy map, actually the yellow arrow should be pointing here to the category, which is plotted on two axes. The further it is to the right, the higher the level of competition. In this case, you see the sales as plotted on or sales rank as plotted on the y-axis. It's pretty high up here in the green zone, but the number of titles is just scratching here or just beyond the 3,100 mark, and that's measured in terms of numbers of English-speaking titles on the Amazon.com platform. So we have a very attractive ratio of sales to competition here as one of the examples how we analyze these things. Moving to science fiction and fantasy, sales are a little lower than on the mystery, thriller, suspense side, but we also see here a pretty stable development and also trend-wise a very slight rise here again towards the year end. One interesting phenomenon here is the bestseller list anthologies and short stories, which has shown also a very strong performance with a 42% 12 months change, rising from an average sales rank of around only 10,000 to 8,000 here 12 months back. Now here the sales are in the, even rising into the top 2,000 of the Amazon Kindle store. And next to, some of the short stories, we do see here a number of anthologies and especially also box sets being heavily marketed and pushed into the category here. As you can see when you go through this bestseller list. It is a very diverse one, and the picture becomes even clearer if you look here at the longer time range. This is from 2014. In about mid-2014 here we started recording the average performance of the top 20 bestsellers, and you see it has its ups and downs here. The low point was in around December 2018, and then over the last year we see this very strong increase in sales of the anthologies and short story sci-fi bestseller list. And when it comes to the positioning on the K-lytics strategy map, we see it is, you know, the sales are, it's just here at the border between hot niches, hot mainstream. So just across 10,000 titles in size, we have 12,931 English speaking titles, and the average sales rank across the top 20 titles is around 1,700. Then let's briefly talk about our top category, romance, on the Amazon Kindle platform. It's always super stable, #1 up there. It's been the case for months and years. But it's always important to look into the sub and sub categories as to what is happening, what is trending. Here, what I found interesting is we saw the rising trend in medical mystery thriller suspense, so medical thrillers. We see here an almost like a mirror development in medical romance. Although it may be fair to say that some of the effect is also just due to the fact that Amazon introduced this category anew in about 1 year ago, and obviously many romance authors and publishers simply jump at it, put their books into it and push it upwards. So that's why we see part of this, you know, very strong rising trend here towards the beginning of the year and the first quarter, but then, you know, a more stable, you know, slight upward trend here from the 10,000 range up here into the top couple of hundreds. And you know, many authors and publishers have jumped on it. Why? Because the sales here have been pushed pretty high, with an average sales rank of 3,459 across the top 20 titles in the Kindle store. But the size of the category is still, you know, below 1,000 titles. It's a really, really small categories, given the fact that you have, you know, more than 400,000 titles in the romance category overall. Not all of the titles that you find in the bestseller list, of course, are medical romance in the strict sense of the word, such as this one, which is, you know, arbitrary example, trending pretty high up there right now as I do this video. But there is opportunity, and there's also ranking opportunity, because as you see with the small size given, it is definitely not as crowded as the other categories there. Then another longer term development to look at, and which we've been monitoring: romance, paranormal, vampires. Vampires never die, and we see, if we look at the data over a 4-year time frame here, from 2014, 2015, all the way here to December 2019, we see a clear renaissance of the paranormal vampires after, you know, the big hype back in 2015. A couple of trends here coming together, you know, Bella Forest pushing the Harley Merlin series, which is one factor. Combine this with a couple of, you know, urban fantasy type of titles, and the Academy romance trends, which sometimes also builds on the, you know, involves vampires. Put all these together and combine them with classic paranormal shifters and vampire type of romance, you find this very positive trend here over time. Only thing to keep in mind, this is more a hot mainstream type of category, as we have a category size of more than 16,000 titles. But as you can see here in the yellow dot, the average sales rank across the top 20 titles at 400 in the Kindle store is very high up there. A quick word about teen young adult here. Although trend wise, you know, if we put through a line, it's been recovering a bit. The teen young adult category has seen its ups and downs here over the last year, sometimes with your short-term blips downwards. Let's have a look at one interesting phenomenon here. This is the category romance. Well, romance, I was jumping ahead. No, it's fantasy magical realism, and this is an interesting example of one of these, you know, hijack type of categories, because magical realism has been a pretty popular thing, you know, in 2019, and the type of covers and books you have there, you know, these were the type of titles you found in the category over the year. And the interesting thing though is we were wondering, hey, were they like really that popular? And if we look at the dedicated category that Amazon introduced for teen, young adult, sci-fi and fantasy, magical realism fiction, we now see that the category is basically completely occupied with academy romance, academy urban fantasy type of titles, you know, from top to bottom, witches, urban fantasy, academy, young adult, and or harem type of fantasy literature. And it is really an example of where the definition of a market is almost changing within 12 months. Because if you look at Wikipedia, you know, magical realism, you know, very broad definition, a style of fiction that paints a realistic view of the modern world by also adding magical elements. It is sometimes called fabulism and so on and so forth, in reference to the conventions of fables, myths, and allegory. Well, you know, most of the urban fantasy stuff that you now find in there, or paranormal romance even, you know, also fits that definition. But if you look at the, you know, various resources of how to write magical realism in this very case, you know, none of these resources and authorities, if you want, about the genre, concerning the genre, probably had this in mind when they talk about it. So you see how a market is defined by the market, by the readers, by what is selling within a certain category and within a certain designation. Whatever the case may be, you know, sales very high and the size of category is still very, very small. So you see, even within a category that is, you know, small or with a sideward trends, you always find these nuggets that are happening within the major category. Lastly, a quick word about fiction and non-fiction as well. Non-fiction always being outperformed on Kindle by literature and fiction, the red line, so it's blue versus red here. Although as we approach the end of the year, we obviously see also some interesting developments in non-fiction. So before we go into pricing, we already see a particular spike in the self-help titles. I think almost a little early for the year. Usually we see this more really towards the year end, when the New Year's resolutions are being made or being implemented in January times. We see here a very early spike. Correspondingly, we see a very early rise in sales, also in the business and money category on Kindle. Now in December 2019, the only one still a bit behind is health and fitness. But you see, if we look here at last year's data, January, February 2018, here the typical uptick comes a bit later, not at Christmas, but obviously as we go into the new year in January, February time, when you want to burn all those calories that you've taken in over the Christmas times. All right, then let's conclude here with the monitoring of the pricing. Very stable prices these days in the romance category. We see a slight upward trend here towards the year end. We started here in Q1 at about the $3 mark, and the romance titles have risen back to a price higher than $3.50 on average in the top 100. Similarly, we see a slight upward trend here in the Mystery Thriller Suspense prices, obviously with the monthly ups and downs, but if you put a trend line through it, we also see here over the year that prices have risen by as much as 50%, sorry, not 50%, 50 cents. And also we see rising prices in science fiction and fantasy. Now, the overall driver behind this could be, that's my personal hypothesis, with the rising ad costs. You know, people also tend to promote books not just at promotional prices, but full prices, or relatively speaking higher prices than before, because you do have to get some return on your advertising spend. That's my personal hypothesis behind it, and we're obviously curious to see how this will develop here in the coming year 2020. All right, so much for the Kindle Market Trends December 2019. If you're not a full K-lytics member yet, I invite you to join our membership, either as a premium or elite member, to get complete access to our category databases, as well as the complete video content, as well as our category reports and genre reports. Come visit us at K-lytics.com. That's K-lytics.com. If we don't talk before, have some happy holidays and a great start into the new year. We will publish a couple of, journal reports probably between the holidays to assist you with your planning for 2020, and then we have a couple of reports in the lineup just for January to continue with a head start into 2020. This is Alex Newton from K-lytics, ebook market intelligence for success.